please join me in giving a warm welcome to Drew.
All right, first off, you're all awesome. I love coming to events like this because it's hard not to be inspired, because the really cool thing for me is I'm in a room full of people who said yes. Like, at one point you took a look at your time, you took a look at your finances, you took a look at all the stresses in your life, and you still decided, okay, I'm going to give, I'm going to volunteer, I'm going to act. And to be in a room full of people who are willing to say yes, I think, I talk about leadership, but ultimately it comes down to somebody being willing to say yes. And so I think it's amazing to be a part of a night that celebrates that. Having said that, there's a question I ask everybody, and I want to ask it to this audience. By show of hands, how many of you are 100% completely and totally comfortable with calling yourself a leader? Overwhelming. I just went through the whole thing about you saying yes to thinking, to volunteering, to acting. The thing is, I've asked that question to every audience for 3 years, so hundreds of audiences. No matter where I ask it, there's always a huge portion that doesn't put up their hand. And I find it amusing. I did it once at an event called Breakfast with the Mayors, and it was the mayors of like Burlington, Milton, Oakville. And right now, like, the mayors are thinking I didn't raise my hand. And they didn't care, but their PR people who were sitting at the next table were just like, put your hand up. But there's something about the term leader I've discovered in my research that people are uncomfortable with. They act as if it's something that we need permission to use. So one day you hope you get a title, you hope you get a business card, you hope somebody recognizes you in a way that allows you to say, I'm a leader. But what I've discovered is that most people think to just claim the title without getting that permission publicly, most people think it'll cause them to be looked at as cocky or arrogant, and so they keep their hand down. And what I think instead happens is that we turn around and we make leadership into something bigger than us. And we make leadership into something beyond us, and we make leadership about changing the world. And so many people start to think, if what I did isn't some sort of earth-shattering act, it doesn't deserve the title. And what I worry about is that we spend so much time in our society celebrating amazing things that hardly anyone can do. What we've done is we've convinced ourselves that those are the only things that are worth celebrating. And so what we do is we start looking at these giants in society and we compare ourselves to them. And we say, look at Warren Buffett invest, and look at Madonna perform, and look at Steve Jobs innovate, and look at Tiger Woods used to play golf, or do any number of other things. And we say that's where the bar is. And if we don't play at that level, then actually calling ourselves the same title that those people do actually makes us look foolish. My problem is this, is that I think when we use that as the measuring stick for leadership, we inherently devalue leadership that is happening every day around us. And we start to let moments of leadership pass by, and we don't let ourselves take credit for them, and we don't let ourselves feel good about them. One thing about humans is the things that we seek out doing the most often are the things that make us feel good. So when we let leadership go by and we don't let ourselves take credit for those moments, and when we let moments of leadership pass our friends and our coworkers and our family, the people we love by, and we don't make sure that they get credit for them, I think we're pulling leadership out of our lives, I think we're pulling it out of our organizations, and I think we're pulling it out of the world. And I think that we need it. Now, I've been lucky over the last 15 years that I work with these amazing people who have helped me redefine what leadership means to me in a way that's made my life better. And now I get to travel around and share with people that redefinition in the hopes that the people who kept their hands down maybe think a little bit more about that. Because what I've discovered in my research is that when people answer that question, when people evaluate themselves as people and as leaders, what we tend to do is we focus on the extraordinary. We focus on extraordinary days in our lives, days where things happen that don't usually happen. And the fact is that this is an extraordinary day. We usually go to work and work incredibly hard. Very rarely do we all come together from all kinds of different places and say, we're going to take a minute and celebrate it. So that's an extraordinary day. And I think that there's good extraordinary, days like today, days where we accomplish a major goal, days where we get something we've worked really hard for. And there's negative extraordinary, where we fail at something as individuals and organizations, where we don't get something we think we deserve, where we hurt someone that we care about. And I think extraordinary days can teach us a tremendous amount about ourselves and our leadership. I don't deny that. But what I think is so important is to remember that the extraordinary days in our lives are always outnumbered by the everydays. And I think that the nature and the frequency of the extraordinary days in our lives and our organizations, they're determined by how we behave in those everydays. And the most successful organizations I know, the ones that attract and keep tremendous people, are the ones that put a tremendous amount of focus on that everyday leadership. They make sure that it's fostered, they make sure that it's recognized, and they make sure that it's rewarded. And I was really lucky because that idea of the power of the everyday leader kind of hit me in the face the first job I ever did. Because my first ever official job was as a fundraiser. So when I was 19 years old, I was in love. Like that annoying 19-year-old in love. Like heartbreaking, head over heels, she is the sun and the moon. I wrote crappy poetry in love. I think her name was Megan. Megan and I didn't work out. But Megan completely opened a whole different world to me, because we went to school at a tiny little university on the east coast of Canada called Mount Allison University. Someone is either from Mount Allison or just the East Coast in general. East Coasters just love it when you reference them, period. Mount Allison, wonderful. Mount A has 2,000 people at it in a town called Sackville, New Brunswick, which has 5,000 people in it and is as exciting as it sounds. Like Sackville is in the middle of nowhere. You can see it from there. And the thing about Sackville is in the summer, everybody leaves. There's nobody left except for this incredibly small number of students who work with the professors. And in the summer of 1998, Megan was one of those students. Now, I'm not a math expert, and I am not an expert on romance, but I figured that if 90% of the men in town leave, my chances with Megan increase exponentially. But I needed a job, so I started looking for a job for that summer. And the only job that was available was as a fundraiser for Shinorama Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis, the Mount Allison chapter. And I hated fundraising. I did. For me, fundraising meant the chocolate-covered almond in front of the liquor store. That was all it did. All right, when I was a Cub Scout, I could not move those things. And I was fat with like these teeth. I looked like a beaver. I was cute. Couldn't move the chocolates. All right. So I'm warped about fundraising, but I really liked Megan, so I take this job. And I go away to this conference, which is full of a room full of people who say yes, and who give, who act, who volunteer. And it changed my life. And I came back and said, I have to blow this campaign out of the water. And Shinorama raises money for the Cystic Fibrosis Canada. It's done at 65 colleges and universities across Canada. Every September, they make about $1 million in September. Now, 65 colleges and universities across the country, 35,000 volunteers. The year I took over Mount Allison's campaign, it was 65th best. I'll let some of you take the math on that one. We made $258. When you have dropped more at the bar in one night than your entire fundraising campaign raises, you've got a problem. And I channeled my West Wing leadership wisdom at the time, which was when you are dumb, surround yourself with smart people. And when you are smart, surround yourself with smart people who disagree with you. And I got this amazing team together, and we put out and said, we're going to make $2,500, which would break the record from Shiner and Mount Allison. And we made $15,000. And that was it. Like, thank you very much. I was hooked. And I'm so proud of it. And this past year, the people who ran it made $56,000. So it's amazing how that first step then turns into something that makes your first step kind of embarrassing. But it changed everything, because when you're 19 years old and you come together and for the first time you watch what happens when an entire community pulls together, we were hooked. And so we said, okay, when you're 19 years old and you do something once, you are an expert. And so we said, next year, we're going to do $20,000. And we put together the single greatest fundraising campaign, best plan ever created. And I am completely confident in saying that, because none of you can prove me wrong. Because we never had to execute it. And we all know that nothing makes a plan better than never actually having to do it. I'm now a consultant for a living. That's how I get paid. Here's an excellent plan. If it doesn't work, I'm sure you messed up on the execution, so pay me. Some of you work with consultants. You're like, yes, indeed. Some of you are consultants and going, dudes, come on. Now, the problem was we had this great fundraising plan, but on the day that we were supposed to send 750 volunteers out into the community, there was a hurricane. Not a bad storm, a hurricane. And of course, I've never seen one before. We're Canadian, you don't see them a lot. So have you ever been so angry that instead of trying to make the best of it, you simply make yourself matter? So I stood in the hurricane, as if to stare it down. And so I'm out there soaked on one half because the water's coming sideways. And one of my volunteers comes up and says, Drew, don't worry, it's not a hurricane. And I said, it certainly feels like a hurricane. And he said, no, a hurricane has a sustained surface wind speed of 76 miles per hour. It's 74 today. And for a second, I felt better. And then I watched this cat slowly get blown down the sidewalk, which is and no matter what happens when you see a cat be like, matter how bad your day is, it's better than that guy. So I said, you know what, let's do it. Send him out there, 750 volunteers out into the storm. And you've all seen volunteers who do this. They have no business going out there. And they just did it, and they loved it. And I talk about the power of everyday leadership. And how I feel about leadership was changed that day by a bunch of guys I never met. And they worked at a strip mall in Moncton, New Brunswick, at a print shop. And I sent 12 teenage volunteers into a parking lot to wash cars in a hurricane. Who gets their car washed in a hurricane? Although some smart ass once pointed out, everyone gets their car washed in a hurricane, but nobody pays for it. And so these students told me later that it was so wet, they were spraying each other with the hose because it made them feel drier. And the guys in the print shop looked out and see these wet, dripping wet volunteers, and they said, we have to do something. So they went to their banner making machine, and they printed this massive banner. And it said, yes, it's raining, but we have soap. Come on. And a big arrow. And so then they laminate it and they bring it out to my volunteers, who think it's the greatest thing they've ever seen. They unfold it, and in ankle-deep water are standing in the middle of the street in Moncton, holding up this sign. And they said, Drew, as soon as we put the sign out there, everyone starts turning in to get their car washed. And I said, were you blocking the street? And they said, well, yeah, but everyone wanted to, we could tell. Always that balance between like the energy of volunteers. Because of moments like that, those guys in the print shop, volunteers would stand on their head in the puddles underwater until people gave them $20 to breathe. Obviously, we don't encourage that type of behavior, but like stores that were saying, well, we don't know if we want people busking or asking for donations, all of a sudden we're asking people into their stores. And because we did that, or because people did that, these little moments of, well, okay, we'll just reach out a little bit to this person. We made $18,000 in a hurricane. Yeah, the most had ever been raised at our school before. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever. Like, we were so thrilled that we'd gone out into basically, like, this white water rafting trip. And it brought back $18,000. And I felt like that for 2 days. And then I got reminded that so much of what we think of ourselves and our accomplishments, we allow to be shaped by other people. Because one of the local papers ran an article on our record-breaking fundraising campaign. And the headline said, Shinorama comes up $2,000 short. That was the sound my heart made. My mouth made significantly worse sounds. I was going around to international students and saying, what is the worst swear word in your language? What is the worst swear word in your language? But that's what they chose to focus on. And that's all it took to shift the whole thing for me. Because I said, you know what, leaders set goals. They take their teams to the goals. And if you don't sit around saying, well, it didn't work out the way we wanted to. You admit you failed. And you figure out how to fix it, and you go and you fix it. And so I allowed myself to start feeling as if we'd failed. And I started to make my team feel that way too. And then 2 days after that, a girl walked into a bar. It's not the beginning of a joke. I bartended to pay my way through school, and at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, this young woman marches up to the bar as we're closing, and looks up at me and says, hi, I'm a geek. And I have no idea the conversational etiquette that's supposed to follow. Hi, I'm a geek. So I'm with the international symbol of I don't know where this conversation is going. Okay. And she said, I have to go to medical school. I have to go to medical school. And I need to study all the time. So every night, I study. But I love to dance. So I allow myself one week every semester, the first week that we get back, I will come out and dance here until you throw me out every night. And I've been doing that for 2 years. And for those 2 years, every single night when I leave this place at 2 o'clock in the morning, I walk through this building and I see your Shinorama team. And I see them making donation boxes and painting banners and sending emails. Drew, I watched you give 12 speeches in 2 nights to try to get people to come out and do this campaign. And I want to let you know that I have never seen a group of people care more about anything in my life. And I want to let you know that I noticed I'm not the only one. And I feel better there are people like you guys in the world. And she hands me an envelope and walks out the door. If you would like someone to cruise on a compliment for 15 years, may I highly recommend I Feel Better There Are People Like You in the World. Because it floored me. And she walks out, and then finally I say, okay, I got to go tell my co-chair, her name is Amanda, she worked with me that night, that this woman had just come in and said the most amazing thing about our work. And I'm walking over to Amanda, and I open up this envelope, which I figured was a card or like a note. And inside the envelope was a personal check from a 21-year-old girl for $2,000. And yeah, well, talk to her. All I did was cash it. But in the memo line, she wrote for inspiration rendered. Like I wasn't going to cry when I saw the check, right? Just throw that note on. But this, and you know, I'd never seen her before in my life. And two things ripped through my mind. One, oh my God, somebody was watching. And then, oh my God, somebody was watching. Because I think sometimes in pursuit of these goals, you know, these numbers, sometimes in pursuit of trying to go after things that we think will make us look the best, we behave in ways that make us look the worst. And we tell ourselves it's okay, because once we get there, we'll look so good it won't matter. Or I think we rationalize it like this. Once we get there, we will have so much more time, so much more money, so much more influence. We will do so much good that it won't matter. And I think that sometimes what I've discovered about leadership is that, you know what, every time we act like less than we are, every time we act like less than we want to be, you know what, I think that's pulling leadership away. But I also think it's so important to recognize that there's this phrase that says, you're only as good as you are when nobody's watching. I think we need to amend that. I think we need to say we're only as good as you are when nobody's watching, because somebody is always watching. That's what that girl opened my eyes to me about. And here's the thing. No matter how tremendously successful your campaign was and the work that you did, or I just want to say this, somebody was watching. Somebody in your organization, someone at another organization, some other volunteer, your kids were watching the fact that you took time out of your day, out of your work, amidst all the other things, and you decided to do this in whatever capacity you did. You volunteered, you acted, you gave. Somebody was watching, and I think we need to give ourselves credit for that. And the reason I started telling that story about that girl with the check, I started telling it at the National Shinorama Conference. Because what would happen is people would be so excited for the entire year, and then after the campaign was over, they wouldn't answer our emails, they wouldn't answer our phone calls. And when I finally tracked one of my favorite volunteers down, who had just disappeared, I said, "Where'd you go?" And he said, "I was so ashamed we didn't hit what we were trying to do. And I thought you would be upset with us." And I said, I need to tell people that the work that we do isn't just about the end result, the dollars. And because we do tremendous work with that. You do tremendous work with yours. But what people think about your organization, you as a leader, and your community by watching the fact that you chose to give, to volunteer, to act. I think that's truly where leadership comes from. The problem is that we minimize it. I think we're trained to minimize it. One thing about the English language I found is that it is a language of complete doubt and uncertainty. There are more phrases for "I don't think that's going to happen" in English than I've ever seen. Possibly, maybe, potentially, good chance that. How many different ways were you taught growing up to actually qualify everything that you go after, to sort of manage expectations? And one of the most powerful ones, I think, that we need to be aware of in the work that we do is the word just. Because we are surrounded by people who will say, "I'm just something. I'm just a volunteer. I'm just part-time. I'm just a receptionist. I'm just something." What I've tried to say to so many of the people I work with, particularly young people, is every time you say, "I'm just something," you're giving people permission to expect less from you. And we let people who we care about and who are tremendously important to our lives, to our work, to our campaigns, we let them stand in front of us and say "just." One of the biggest things I think we can do to make ourselves believe that we're leaders is we need to stop letting people that we value diminish themselves in front of us. And I think one of the ways we can do that is by not allowing ourselves to do it. Because great people we work with use that word too much. And I was reminded of that last year around this time. I do speeches everywhere. And the most nervous I have ever been was when I had to go back and speak at my old high school. Because I don't care who you are and what you've done, when you walk through the door of your old high school, you immediately revert to the person that you were when you were in high school. I was not cool in high school. And there was a guy who made it better. And his name was Mr. Kiff. Mr. Kiff was the head custodian at my high school. And he had been there for 20 years when I was there. And he was the kindest man I have ever known. He would put birthday cards in people's lockers. He would, if you lost someone, he put flowers in people's lockers anonymously. To this day, there are students who don't know where they came from. But the thing that impressed me the most, because I'm so bad at this, is he knew every student's name. 1,300 people. And that means every year he learned 600 or 700 new grade 9 names. And he not only knew people's names, but he had this unbelievable, uncanny sense of knowing who felt alienated, who felt bullied, and who felt left out. And he would stop and talk. And I was one of those guys in the early stages of high school. And he just stopped when he was cleaning at the end, and he'd always make it feel like he cared. And he remembered your name. And that was the smallest thing he could do. And I went back. I'm 35 years old now. I went back, and I'm in the principal's office. And it's weird to have the principal offer you coffee. And he sees me through the window, and he runs in. And he gives me this huge hug, and he says, "Drew, oh my God, I'm so glad to see you." And I was so shocked he remembered me, and I said, Mr. Kipp, I can't believe you know who I am. And he says, are you kidding? I've been following everything you do. I'm so proud of you. And I know that's so, like, the phrase, I'm so proud of you, when it's delivered from someone who actually means it, is it not one of the most extraordinary things you ever hear? I do not understand why we don't give it out 3 times a day. Like, knowing what it does to us, and it was so odd to hear him say it, like, hit me like a punch in the stomach. And so I finally said, look, Mr. Kipp, this was not a good time for me. And you made my time here better, and I never told you that. So I want you to know that you've been a really important guy to me. And he said, yeah, look, I'm just a janitor who knew you before you were big. And that phrase, just a janitor, like, it ripped through me. Because I thought about it. And I realized that in the 35 years that now he's been there, like, thousands of young people have gone through that school. Thousands. And they've gone on to become all the things that we're supposed to care and look up to. Doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers, CEOs. And if you walk into any of their offices right now and you say his name, Mr. Kipp, they smile. And I've tested it. 15 years after they last saw him, when you say his name in a room that he's not in, they will smile. And I think that that is an extraordinary life. And I think that that is a life of leadership. And I wonder sometimes that when we evaluate ourselves, whether to put up our hand, why we don't ask, 15 years from now, when people haven't seen me in that long, when they hear my name, will they smile? And I think it's also so important to ask ourselves, who in our organizations, who in our lives, who in our campaigns, who are those just people? The ones you know would say, I'm just something. And the way I ask it is this: if we stripped away money and we stripped away jobs, and we weren't allowed to factor that into the equation, who lives their lives in a way that impresses you? If you can't consider money and jobs, who goes about their daily life, whatever it is, in a way that impresses you? And I think one of the tremendous ways that we can demonstrate everyday leadership is to go up to those people once you figure out who they are and say, you live your life in a way that impresses me. And more importantly, use this language. You're a leader to me. Because I think that leadership recognized is leadership created. And our organizations, our families, the people we work with, our volunteer campaigns are filled with those people who call themselves, I'm just something. Let's go out and let's start telling them that they matter and get more people to raise their hands, because everything that we do will become better as a result of it. And I know that we all have plans. Like everything in your job, in your life, in all the work that you did with the United Way, you had plans. And I think plans are so important. Malcolm Gladwell said that dreams don't come true. Goals come true. Goals without plans are just dreams. So have your plans. But what I've discovered in all of my work is that the biggest impact most people have on the world has nothing to do with your plans. The biggest legacy you leave behind on every organization, on every person that you interact with, is almost always the result of the unplanned consequences of your everyday actions. And I want to close by sharing the story that opened my eyes the most to that very fact, that I was spending too much time deciding whether or not I was a leader based on end results and not the process. Because what I discovered is that, you know what determines what people think of you and your organizations? It's not the goals that you set. It's not even the goals that you meet. It's the way you go about chasing your goals. And I think that we have to give ourselves more credit for that. And when I left Mount Allison, I'd been there for 7 years. I liked it. And I enjoy the letters after my name. And so a young woman walked up to me at my goodbye party. And she said, Drew, I remember the first time I met you. And don't you love it when someone uses your name and you have no idea who they are? And she said, yeah, I remember the first time I met you. And she told me a story from 4 years earlier. And she said, 4 years ago, it was the night before I started university. And I'm in a hotel room with my mom and my dad. And for some reason, I was overwhelmed by this belief that I couldn't do it. And I started to cry. And my parents hadn't seen me cry in 8 years. But there's nowhere to hide in a hotel room. And they were amazing. My parents said, look, we know you were scared. Trust us. We are way more scared than you are. But you've worked so hard for this. You owe it to yourself to go tomorrow and try. So let's go to registration tomorrow. And if at any point during the day you feel like you can't do this, just tell us. We will take you home no matter what. We love you no matter what. And she said they were right. My whole life had been about going to university. So I went and I got in line. And it was the wrong line. It took an hour to discover. And then you get in another line, and it's the wrong line. She goes, I'm in my third line, and everyone's screaming, and everyone's yelling, and they've got weird face paint. And I'm not an extrovert. And I thought, here I am again in a place that only values extroverts. And I can't do this again. And she said, so I quit. Standing in line, I just quit. And as soon as I made that decision, I had this feeling of peace. Like, I'm so okay with this decision. And before I could turn to my mom and my dad to tell them to take me home, like they said they would, you came out of the nearest building wearing the stupidest hat I have ever seen a human being wear in my life. And you had a giant sign that said, Shinorama Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis. And you had a bucket full of lollipops. And you were walking along the line and you were handing these lollipops out to people and trying to get them to do Shinorama. And all of a sudden you stopped and you just stared at me. It was creepy. Then you look at the guy next to me, and you pull a lollipop out of your bucket, and you hold it out to this guy, and you go, dude, you've got to give a lollipop to the beautiful girl you were standing next to in line. When life gives you, come on, you've got to give a lollipop. She goes, I've never seen this guy before in my life, but I have never seen a human being get more embarrassed faster in my life. He turns beet red, he won't even look at me, he just does this with the lollipop. And I felt bad for him, so I take the lollipop from him. And as soon as I do, you get this incredibly severe look on your face, really disappointed. And you look at my parents and you say, look at your little girl. Look at your little girl. It is her first day away from home. Her first day without mom and dad to watch out for her. And already she is taking candy from a complete and total stranger! And she said, everybody lost it for 20 feet in every direction. I don't know if you've ever over-laughed. Like, it's not even that funny, but you just can't even talk because everyone's so stressed out. And she goes, in that moment where everybody was howling, I changed my mind and I didn't quit. And I haven't talked to you once in the 4 years since that day. But I heard that you were leaving, and before that happened, I had to come up to you and tell you, you have been an incredibly important person in my life. And I'm really going to miss you. So good luck, all right? And she walks off. And I'm standing there thinking, why does this keep happening to me? And she comes back. She gets about 6 feet away, and she comes back, and she goes, there's one more thing that you should probably know. I've been dating that guy for 4 years since that. Here's the kicker. A year and a half after I moved to Toronto, they invited me to their wedding. She married the dude. Good luck. But here's the big moment for me. I don't remember that. Like, I have searched my memory banks for that moment because I was awesome in that moment, and I would like to remember being that awesome once in my life. But the thing is, it wasn't there, and I think that was such an eye-opener to me to realize that maybe the biggest moment of leadership in my life, maybe the biggest impact I'd had on another human being, like a moment that had a girl walk up to a complete stranger 4 years later and say, you have been an incredibly important part of my life, was a moment that I didn't remember. It was such an eye-opener to the fact that what we put the most money and time and stress into when it comes to how people feel about us are often not the things that have the greatest impact. It's how we're behaving in those everyday moments. How many of you, by show of hands, have what I like to refer to as a lollipop moment? And that is a moment where someone has said something or done something unexpectedly for you that made you feel, even for a moment, like the world was a better place. How many of you have a lollipop moment in your life? Awesome. How many of you who put your hand up have told the person who created that moment that they created that moment? It's not bad. That's about half. Half of you haven't told them. I don't understand that. Like, we live in a world where we celebrate birthdays, where all you have to do is not die for 365 days and we will throw you a party. No, seriously, if you avoid getting speed bumped by a bus, here's a cake. But we let people in our workplaces, in our families, in our friendships, we let them walk around and we don't tell them they fundamentally changed our lives. You know what? If you didn't put your hand up because you're not a leader, you want to know how you start? Simply start telling the people who have made your life better that they have made your life better. And every single one of you, especially in the work that you guys do, every single one of you is the catalyst for those lollipop moments. You've all said something, or done something, or simply behaved in a way that makes other people say you are living your life in a way that makes me proud. And sometimes they won't tell you. And if you haven't been told yet, you're one of the half that hasn't heard it yet. Here's the thing, though. I know it is frightening to believe that we can be that powerful. I know that it is scary to believe that we can have that kind of impact every day, because as long as we keep leadership something bigger than us, as long as we keep leadership something beyond us, as long as we keep leadership about changing the world, what we're doing is we're giving ourselves an excuse to not expect it from ourselves and from each other every day. Marianne Williamson wrote that extraordinary poem that says, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that frightens us. And I think if we're going to see more people raise their hands, and more of the people that we try to inspire and engage raise their hands, more of the young people that we work with raise their hands, I think we have to get beyond that fear, and so we can rise above it. And we can let our little brothers, our little sisters, our kids, our volunteers, the people we work with, they can watch us value how much we can matter to each other every day through our work more than money and power and influence and prestige. I think it's time to redefine leadership. I think it's time to define it as being about lollipop moments. How many of them we create, how many of them we say thank you for, and how many of them we pay forward. Because somewhere along the line, we made leadership about changing the world, and I would argue that there is no world. There's just 7 billion understandings of it. And that means that every time you change one person's understanding of the world, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how many people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world and in their own lives. Every time you change one person's understanding of it, you change the whole world. You do that every day in your work. You've proven it by being here. You came out and you engaged, and you've done it, and yet people didn't raise their hand. I think if we could come to understand leadership like that, as happening in the everyday, I think if we can define leadership like that, I think if we can teach leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And with will, determination, and grace too, I think that we can make anything happen. And I think that it's a simple idea, but that doesn't mean that it's a small one. And I want to thank you all so much for letting me be a part of your community tonight. You make me feel better there are people like you in the world. You really do. Guys, thank you so very, very much.